living deliberately, as opposed to living accidentally or living by chance or living inadvertently. Like stuff happens. Just go through life and stuff happens. And I think it's very important that we're talking about this now for a couple of reasons. First, it's kind of it's a natural follow-on to where we've been. I can't believe it's the middle of April here. But we started the beginning of the year, as we always do, kind of giving ourselves an opportunity to reflect on what is it that we believe? What do we believe about this thing called God? And we recognize that God is a word that cannot possibly explain that which is ineffable. But it means something to us. And what it means to us is most important, because whatever that means to us, that is going to set the tone for the rest of our lives. So this is why we constantly go in every year. We go in and we kind of do a self-check. What does this mean to me? And as we've progressed since January, we've been working with this idea that we are spiritual beings. And we have been created to kind of make that discovery. So it's as if we have had, in Hindu terms, we have had ignorance heaped upon us. In the Judeo-Christian terms, we fell from grace. And we moved from the experience of living in the presence and communication with the divine into the experience of separation, into the experience of the belief or the knowledge of good and the knowledge of evil. Not the reality of good and the reality of evil, but the knowledge of good and the knowledge of evil. And in the garden, to go back to the Garden of Eden metaphor, in the garden there's another tree. It's the tree of life. And that's what we are progressing towards. Remember we talked about the hero's journey. The hero starts out and the hero goes on this journey and has all these trials and tribulations, and the hero comes right back to where they started. But they're changed and they're different. And that's our journey. That's the metaphor we're using for our journey. We are on this journey of rediscovering that which part of us already knows. But we do this as a manner or a means of discovering our uniqueness, of creating our uniqueness. The divine life, the unity, has created multiplicity out of itself. It is expressing itself through each and every part of its creation uniquely. And that's what we are. We are that uniqueness. And we are a unique, individualized expression of that one life. To put it in other terms of the ocean and the wave, we are the wave. We are the wave. The ocean is expressing itself as a wave, as us. The wave is not the entire ocean, but whatever the wave is, it's part of the ocean waving. So you and I are divine love waving at one another. I love that idea. We're just divine love. We go through this life to learn, to realize that we are divine love. In the course of this discussion, and in the course of where we've been, we bring up the law of mind. It is done unto you according to your belief, the law of mind. As you think and believe in your heart, so are you. Right? I love what Florence Scovel-Shinn tells us. She says, life's a game of boomerangs. Whatever you toss out, you're going to get back. See, so we've all trying to understand. We're here and we're trying to understand. We're like the turtle on the fence post. We don't know how we got up here, but we figure we must have had some help. We couldn't have done it by ourselves. And as we try to understand, we begin to realize that it's true that life is done unto us according to our belief. It is done unto us according to our belief. Now here's the key that we have to keep this in mind. It is done unto us according to our belief, whether we have consciously chosen those beliefs or whether we have unconsciously or subjectively accepted those beliefs. And this is a very key point, because sometimes people say, well, well, why did somebody get sick? Were they thinking about getting sick? Were they thinking about this disease? No, of course not. They weren't. Dr. Holmes says it's not that simple. You're never going to be able to go in and put your finger on it and say, oh, that's exactly the thought I had that was responsible. But it is kind of an accumulation or a sum total of our beliefs. And the human race believes in sickness. The human race believes in the necessity of that. It's inevitable in the belief system of the human race. And that belief system is quite evident to us right now. That's why we're talking about this now. And remember, our spiritual practice insulates, isolates, and inoculates us from the race consciousness. That is what its purpose is for, the purpose of spiritual mind treatment, affirmative prayer. That's what it is for. So as long as we are sort of swimming along in race consciousness, then what race consciousness expects and believes, we accept, and we expect, and we believe without being aware of it. So to be deliberate then, to be deliberate is to choose what we will believe, to reflect upon what we believe, to take deliberate action, to direct our beliefs in a certain direction or a certain manner, and to be deliberate. Now the title this morning is Decide to Live Deliberately. Decide to live deliberately. And it works on so many levels. I don't know if we'll get through all of this today or we need to carry it over to next week. We'll just see where it goes. Right? Decide to live deliberately. Now it's almost like a catch-22 in there, you see. Because to live deliberately implies making decisions. It implies making decisions. So we can get up in the morning and we can just take the day as it comes. You know, just whatever comes this way today, we'll just live through it. And for most of our lives, that's what we do. We get up and we may have an idea, well, today when I go to work, I'm going to work on these 3 tasks. And when I come home, I'm going to stop at the store on the way home. And then when I get home tonight, I'm going to mow the grass or whatever. We may have some, kind of a general outline of tasks and activities. When I'm talking about living deliberately, I'm talking about how do you want to live your life today? It implies a sense of purpose. It implies a sense of intention. And if we're going to have a sense of purpose or a sense of intention, we must decide what that is. We must choose. I love the commercials for the soda pop several years ago. Choose wisely, and they took it from one of the Raiders of the Lost Ark movies. Harrison Ford had to save Sean Connery, and in order to do it, he had to pick one cup out of the lineup. He had to choose wisely. Choose wisely. See, but we have to make a choice, and herein kind of comes the catch, right? Living deliberately requires making decisions, but what if we've never even decided to live deliberately? So the starting point of living deliberately is making a decision to live deliberately. And I just invite you to consider, have you made that decision? Have you decided that your life is going to be, if it hasn't already been, that it's going to be or will continue to be something that's deliberate, something that is deliberate. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with, every once in a while we take a day off and we just say, you know what, I don't have any plans for today. I'm not gonna put too much thought into the day, but just wherever the day takes me, that's where I'm going to go. It's a beautiful way to rest, a beautiful way to just be in the moment. But even when we are just being in the moment, we can be living deliberately. We can be living deliberately, because it's not so much about doing, although we will do things out of what we are living, but it is a state of being. It is a state of being. And so when we talk about peace, we say peace is not the absence of war. We're quoting Spinoza here. Peace is not the absence of war, right? But it's a way of living. It's a way of being. And living deliberately is a way of being. It's not about having a to-do list and checking things off and on your to-do list. It's about a way of being. So the first thing we want to talk about is why it's important, and especially why it's important at this time when the world is kind of upside down. Right? And the reason that it's important is twofold. First is if we do not make a decision, if we do not choose to make a decision, if we do not consciously make a decision, we have made a decision. It may not be apparent to us, but we have made a decision to give the direction to the law of mind, to the power that responds to us according to our belief. We have made a decision to allow our subjective mind or our unconscious mind or our subliminal mind. Subliminal is probably the better term for it, right? It's something that's there, but we're not quite aware of it. So what we're doing is we're saying, okay, whatever has accumulated in my subjective mind for however long I have been, right? And we were someplace before we got here, we'll be someplace when we leave here. So of all of these experiences that we've ever had, of all of the things that we've ever come to believe, of everything that is around us in race consciousness, of that which comes to us through the news media and the TVs, that which comes to us just because we are one. Right? We talked about Carl Jung, man and his symbols, and the collective unconscious, And it's like we have a shared part of mind. Dr. Holmes called it race consciousness, a shared part of mind. Why do people on different sides of the world dream similar symbols in their dreams and things like that? Joseph Campbell would say, why is it that on different sides of the world people come up with similar mythologies? It's if there's something that we share. That's what they're talking about, race consciousness. So there's this sum total then of what we believe, and that includes what we believe at a conscious level and at a subliminal level. And if we do not deliberately take action to make a decision to choose how we will live our lives, we have made a decision to just let whatever's in our consciousness dictate that for us. Because life is a game of boomerangs. What you toss out, you're going to get back. And you are always tossing something out. Not just for that 20 minutes twice a day when you stop and do your affirmative prayer, but every minute of every day. And you're believing something. So very, very important. So the first point is a decision not to decide is still a decision, but it is a decision to just accept the status quo, to just accept law of averages, to accept race consciousness. And I think that we want to break out of that. We want to break out of that. We don't want to go through life just being a statistic or just living our lives statistically. We want to have a sense of purpose. We want to have a sense of why we are here, And of course, I kind of gave that away a little bit. Why we are here is to discover our spiritual nature. How we do that is up to us. So the first point is that we must decide. We must decide if we are going to live deliberately, because if we do not decide, we are living by chance. We are living by laws of average. We are living by race consciousness. And we need to break out of that mold. Now, it's very important, I think, to understand why, is that as we start to recognize that, first of all, we do have the ability to change our thinking, we do have the ability to change our beliefs, and once we do change our thinking, once we do change our beliefs, the circumstances in our lives change. Once we start to do that, then we recognize that, yes, I live in a spiritual system. There is more to life than what this bag of bones would lead us to believe. There is so much more. We are connected. There is so much more. There is something that responds to me according to my belief. So I think once we can make that leap, that everything that we are is not contained inside this skin, then it starts to become much easier for us to accept our spiritual nature. So there's a part of us, when we're kids and we're growing up, and we're given our Bible lessons or our catechism lessons, there's a part of us that, oh, spirit, yes, God is spirit. We don't quite understand what that is, The little ones think it might be like Casper, the friendly ghost. But when we start to realize that we're talking about consciousness, and consciousness is not defined by or limited by matter, this is spirit that we're talking about, then it opens up a whole new world of possibilities for us. So this is why it's important for us to start living deliberately. And the second thing is that this is how, once we learn how to do this, this is how we deliberately direct the growth of our consciousness, the evolution of our soul, if you will. Human beings have what we believe is a unique ability. At least we're not aware if any other creatures on earth can do this. But we can become aware. We may become aware. We may not. We may choose not to. But we may become aware of the activity of thought within our consciousness. That's one thing that we can do that, as far as we know, no other species on earth does it. We can be aware of our own thinking. We become aware of what thoughts are. We can be aware of what thoughts enter into our field of consciousness and which ones leave, and we can change those thoughts. We can change those thoughts, A very simple technique Reverend Joan and Reverend James used to teach down in Durham was cancel and replace, cancel and replace. So you're sitting there, and all of a sudden this thought enters your field of awareness, and it's not a thought that you would like to have. Maybe it's an angry thought. Maybe it's a fearful thought. Maybe it's a limiting thought. Imagine it's on a big whiteboard. Now, you're as old as I am. When you were a kid, they were blackboards. I went to take a few courses over to technical college a few years ago, and was talking to one of the kids there about banging erasers out after school, and he says, "Oh my God," he says, "when you went to school they had chalk, huh?" That's when I felt old. Yeah, I said, yeah. So now everything is a dry erase marker and a whiteboard. But you have this whiteboard, and this idea comes in, and this idea is an idea or a thought that you don't want to entertain. You can catch yourself. You can catch yourself observing it and cancel and replace. So you imagine that you have your dry eraser in your hand, and there's this negative thought on the whiteboard, and you just take your dry erase eraser and you wipe it off. And now the board is clean and white, and now you take your pen and you write, what is it you choose? What is it you deliberately choose, So maybe it is an idea of fear, and you replace it with an idea of trust, an idea of love. So our life is our practice. Every thought that comes into our field of awareness is an opportunity to grow, if we should choose to live deliberately. Now, another point to think about in this idea of living deliberately is that if we don't know where we're going, if we don't know what our sense of purpose is, you see, then we can have a lot of time with distractions. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. The kids coming home from school and just wandering all over the neighborhood, and what we want to do is we want to choose to take the most direct path that we can to our spiritual awakening. So if we don't, I think there's a country song that says, if you don't believe in something, you're bound to fall for anything. And it's kind of to that point that if we don't know where we're going, if we don't have some sort of a guiding principle for our life, if we don't have this sense of being deliberate, of deliberately being alive, if we don't have that, then we tend to go over here and over there, and oh, look at this, and oh, look at that, and oh, look at the other thing. And an example that popped into my head this morning is many years ago, I was out, part of my job was to go out to job fairs, go to different cities, and have these big job fairs at the hotels, and People would come in with their resumes, and they would go out and they would go from table to table, and they would talk to the different recruiters from the different companies. And my company would do that, and then I would be, off in a room somewhere. And my job, I was interviewing for technical support engineers. But there were other managers from my company there, and they were interviewing for other positions. And one of them was interviewing for software design engineers, which today I guess they would call them coders. But these are the people that we actually had programming languages in those days, and they sat down and they decided line by line how to write a piece of code in order to make the computer do a certain task. And somehow the screener, the recruiter from HR that was out at the table, so the way it worked was they had this table and people would come up to the table, and the screener would go through and say, well, tell me a little bit about yourself, tell me what you're looking for, and then they would try to take the resumes and put them with the clipboard for the different managers that were hiring, and then they would schedule an appointment. So they would tell us, like, at 10 o'clock you're going to see this person, at 10:30 you're going to see the next, and so on. And I was interviewing, and people were coming in, and they were going through the interviews, and it's kind of interesting to me because most of the candidates would put their GPAs and their classwork. Most of them were recent graduates. And when I was interviewing someone who had sort of an okay transcript, but hadn't been involved in too many extracurricular activities and those sorts of things, I would ask them, well, what is it that you're looking for? What is it that you want to do with your career? Tell me a little bit about why you think this job would help you along the way. And their answer typically was, well, I just want a job. I just need a place to start. Just, if I have this job, and of course I had gone through and explained the job to them, and they were just, it didn't matter to them. They didn't, there was no sense of purpose there. And for some of them, they were young folks, and we hired them, and they turned out to be good employees and those things. But there was no sense of direction. And then for other people I was interviewing, they had all of these extracurricular activities that were pointed towards a purpose, pointed towards something that they wanted to do, And as I was interviewing, I started to interview this one young man. I started to explain a little bit about the job, and he said, Mr. Young, he said, I don't mean to be rude, he says, but I think there's some mistake here. And I said, why is that? He says, well, what job are you interviewing me for? And I said, I'm interviewing you for the position of entry-level technical support engineer. He says, well, that's the mistake. He says, I'm not a technical support engineer. That's not why I went to school. He says, I asked to be interviewed for the position of software designer. That's the interview. And I said, well, wait a second here. Something is wrong, So I took him out, and we went to see the HR people. And what had happened was HR had mixed up the stacks of resumes. So all the people who wanted to be tech support engineers were being interviewed and rejected by the software design manager. And the people who wanted to be software designers were coming in to me, and they were saying, well, this isn't the job that I wanted. But some of the people who were coming into me who said they wanted to be software design engineers were willing to accept the tech support position. They said, well, I'll take a job. It's a job, and I'll take a job. And it might have worked out well for them, it might not. But my point is that the individual who had the sense of purpose of knowing exactly what he wanted, exactly why he was in that interview, exactly why he went to the trouble of preparing his resume, see? He was the one who said there's a mistake here. He was the one. Now, as far as I was concerned, we did get people who had trained to be software engineers who did want to work in tech support. So it was not unusual for me to be interviewing people with that education for the job. But here I had this whole stack of resumes that were supposed to go to another interviewer, and the only one who pointed it out was one who had a sense of purpose. So if we have this sense of living deliberately, if we have this sense of there's a reason, there's something that I wish to be in my life, and then we don't kind of get distracted and say, well, I'll try this for a little while and see how that works out, or I'll try that for a little while and see how that works out, or I'll try the other thing. Excuse me. So what I should mention then is this sense of living deliberately that I'm talking about. It's not necessarily a job. It's not necessarily a career. It's not necessarily a role or a responsibility. All of those things can be avenues through which you express your living deliberately. But they are not your reason. And I think with what's going on in the world now, people are starting to realize that all of these external things that we had perhaps overly identified with, they're gone. See, they're gone. Almost overnight, they're gone. Jobs are gone. Industries are gone. Status, prestige, all of these things are gone. And now people have to get back to what's truly important. What is truly important? Can we be kind and loving to one another? Is my deliberate choice today to be love, to be loving, to be kind? See, it is the qualities of life, it is the qualities of the divine life that I'm talking about here. It is not a specific occupation. So we have to consider then, in living deliberately, what is my life about? When Lori and I first went to Wilmington and opened a center there, we had to sit and do vision work and decide, what are our lives about now? What is this thing that we're doing here? What is the purpose? What is the deliberate choice to make for our lives in this organization? Why am I here? Who am I? Where am I going? All those important questions. And what we decided upon, excuse me, and as I say, it didn't come lightly. It was something that there was a lot of prayer, a lot of meditation, a lot of time. But it was to love, to learn, and to inspire. To love, to learn, and to inspire. And to put it into perhaps a sentence is with love, we learn a little more about God every day, and we share that with others. Inspiring them to do the same. Very simple, very simple. So you can see that through the active ministry, through pastoring a church, that's one way of doing that. Through doing talks and classes on the internet and those sorts of things is another way of doing that. But it's more of a guiding principle of deliberately living. This is what I choose deliberately to do. This is what I choose deliberately to be. Now, in a time of chaos, in a time of confusion, which is what our planet is going through now, it is this sense of purpose, it is this sense of being deliberate that allows the chaos to reform itself in some new way around our purpose, around our vision, around what it is that we are expressing through our lives. In his book on transitions, William Bridges talks about this. He said, we have learned to think in terms of there is a beginning, there is a middle, and then there is an ending. Almost everything that we know of in this life is that way. Even life itself. There's birth, there's living, there's death. Businesses form, businesses operate, businesses go bankrupt or go out of business. Plants, we put a plant in the ground, it blossoms, and then it fades away. See? But that's not. Bridges asks us to consider that's not the way things really work. He says it's usually what happens is there's an ending, and then there's a middle, which is a period of chaos and confusion. Right. So the old is gone, the new hasn't come yet, and there's this turmoil and confusion in the middle. Now, if we go back to the book of Genesis, again, we're told in the beginning there was chaos, and things just weren't as they are today. And then what happened is, right, the Spirit breathed upon the waters. And the divine said, let there be. There was intention, there was purpose. The divine said, let there be, let there be. Once the divine said that, let there be whatever, planets, stars, animals, according to the book of Genesis. Once the divine said that, something happened. And the unformed chaos, the confusion, the energy that was just there formed itself around that decision, around that intention, around that purpose. So the old has to make way. The old has to disintegrate, and it has to make way. And there's this period of confusion while that is going on. But once there is purpose, once there is intention, then that energy that's kind of up in a state of flux can begin to form itself anew around a new purpose. Even something as simple before the service started, we were talking about our gardens, and we have an acre here, and there's woods on part of it, and you can see a tree will fall, and it looks as if life has ended. But the tree disintegrates. The physical part of the tree disintegrates. Over time, you can watch it, and the insects help, and the termites come, and all of these things. But over time, it disintegrates, and it breaks down. And then it becomes part of the soil. And every once in a while, if you look along the tree trunk somewhere, there's a sprout that comes out. A sprig, whatever you call it. A shoot. The shoot comes up. And there's a new expression of life that is coming out of that disintegration of the old expression of life. The old expression. So we seem to be, in terms of the consciousness of the planet, in terms of where we are now, there seems to be this upheaval, this turmoil, things just aren't the way they used to be, and now our leaders are starting to realize, and they're probably never going to go back. And this is an opportunity for us to set our intention to be deliberate. What is it you want to have happen now? It's one of the most powerful questions I ever learned to ask, and we were taught this when we were going through our training. If people come to see us for treatment or for counseling, they're upset, and they wouldn't be coming to see us if they weren't upset about something. And they want to tell their story. They want to tell a little bit about what they're upset about and why they're upset. But at some point we have to get out of the old and start moving towards the new. And the question that turns that is, what do you want to have happen now? I understand you told me a little bit about your story. I understand about the way things were. What do you want to have happen now? And this is a way of getting us into being deliberate, into being deliberate. So as we look about us, as we consider that things are sort of disintegrating, they're just not the way that they used to be, we each have an opportunity to reinvent our lives, based on values of living deliberately. I want to toss one more thing out, and it's obvious we're not going to finish this today. So next week we're going to pick up with decision making itself, the importance of decision making, how to make decisions, and what kind of decisions we want to consider as we live deliberately. But when it comes to thinking about the future, there's generally three possibilities. A lot of the motivational self-help leadership books, planning books, those kind of things. There's three things that we can do with the future. We can be afraid of it and worry about it. That is, we can think about everything that can possibly go wrong and try to make plans for it. Well, what if this happens, and what if that happens? And a lot of contingency planning, and there's always a place for that. But if we do too much of it, we don't do anything except contingency plan. And we're doing it mostly out of fear, right? Worrying. What ifs? It's not a very productive or a very healthy way to live our lives. Second thing we can do with the future is, don't worry about it. It is what it is. Whatever comes, comes, and we'll react to it, we'll respond to it. As they teach you in the military, improvise, adapt, and overcome. When it gets here, we'll figure it out. We'll deal with it. And that may be okay. In some cases, it doesn't give us a sense of purpose. It doesn't give us a sense of moving deliberately in any one direction. Remember, our deliberate direction is to discover more every day of the presence and the activity of God in our lives. And if we're just constantly reacting and responding, a couple things comes in. Are we really living? Or is our life being dictated by circumstances that come to us? When we were doing competitive analysis, one of the ways to gain an advantage on your competitors was to give them something to react and respond to. And while they're busy reacting and responding to whatever it is that you gave them, you go ahead, if you are deliberate in your strategic planning, you go ahead and execute your strategic plans. We used to do case studies on AT&T and MCI, and MCI came along and wanted to enter the long distance market, which had been by law since 1936, the exclusive domain of AT&T. The courts granted MCI the right to start that business, and now they had to find a way to take customers away from AT&T. AT&T didn't have a marketing department. They didn't need a marketing department. They had a monopoly. Not the same AT&T we have today, by the way. The name is the same, but not the organization. Excuse me. So MCI launched Friends and Family, and they were taking business away from AT&T. And finally, one day, AT&T woke up and said, well, we need to find something to counter this. And as soon as AT&T launched their counter, MCI launched their next initiative. They had already planned it. So their game plan was to just constantly give AT&T something to react and respond to. And while AT&T was busy trying to figure out how to react and respond, MCI was not only executing their plans, but they were developing their next plans. So we don't want to react and respond. We don't want to worry, but what we want to do is we want to create. We want to create the future. So today is the tomorrow that we created yesterday. And tomorrow, whatever tomorrow is, we are creating today in our consciousness, So living deliberately, we're going to close here and we're going to pick it up next week with decisions. Living deliberately is a way of you and I creating our future, creating the future we want. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of things that could happen. There's a lot of possibilities. But what do we want to have happen now? What do you want to have happen now? When all of this is behind us, when we go through all this, how do you want to go through it? In love, in service, in kindness, in compassion, in sympathy, in safety, in peace. How do you want to live deliberately? And when you go to bed at night, and when you get up in the morning, can you remind yourself of the choices that you have made on how to live deliberately? Now, in order to live deliberately, we have to make a decision to live deliberately. And as we are living deliberately, we are constantly making decisions as things come to us. Does this help me to live deliberately? Does this thing that I'm looking at, does this fit in with my idea of what it means to live deliberately? How do I choose, you see? So next week we're going to pick up with decisions. Decisions. How do we make decisions? How do we make decisions based on our spiritual values? The importance of decisions. And then how to actually execute them and implement them in our lives. So we'll pick up next week with part 2 of Living Deliberately, which is deciding deliberately. Okay? And we'll see you then. And so it is.